Good evening. Hi, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present and thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to tonight's program with Raymond Antrobus and Terica Florence, presented in partnership with Deaf Spotlight, Seattle Arts and Lectures, and Elliott Bay Book Company. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and the Seattle Times for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a couple quick announcements before we get started. Our friends over at Elliott Bay Bookstore have copies of Raymond's books, and the store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery. You can find Raymond's books at their website, elliottbaybook.com, and we'll also put a link to the book in the chat. And after tonight's event, we'd love to hear from you. Toward the end of the program, we'll post a link to a survey in the chat, and we'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes to share your thoughts with us. Now I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Raymond Antrobus was born in London, Hackney, to an English mother and Jamaican father. He's the author of a number of collections, including Shapes and Disfigurements, To Sweet and Bitter, and The Perseverance. In 2019, he became the first ever poet to be awarded the Rathbone Folio Prize for Best Work of Literature in any genre. Other accolades include the Ted Hughes Award, PBS Winter Choice, a Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award, Somerset Maugham Award, and the Guardian Poetry Book of the Year in 2018, as well as being shortlisted for the Griffin Prize and the Forward Prize. He is the recipient of fellowships from Cave Canem, Complete Works 3, Jerwood Compton, and the Royal Society of Literature. Raymond's poems have been published in Poetry, Poetry Review, Lit Hub, New Statesman, the Deaf Poets Society, among others. Raymond was also a founding member of Chill Pill and Keats House Poets Forum. He's an ambassador for the Poetry School and a board member for English Pen. And he's also an advocate for several deaf charities, including Deaf Kids International and National Deaf Children's Society. And on that note, Raymond also writes for young readers, and his debut children's picture book, Can Bears Ski, was illustrated by Polly Dunbar and was selected as an Ezra Jack Keats honoree winner in 2021. Raymond has won numerous poetry slams, and his poetry has appeared on a number of media outlets, including BBC Two, Channel 4, the Jamaica Gleaner, The Guardian, and TEDx East End, among others. He's here tonight to talk about his new poetry collection, All the Names Given, which poet Kimon Felix says is, quote, a brave, tender, and generous piece of music where family is a chord forever troubled by the process of being named. Raymond is going to share some poems with us, and then he'll speak with Terica T-Flo Florence. T-Flo is a community worker / advocate, poetess, writer, and performer from Atlanta, Georgia. She graduated from Gallaudet University with a history degree, and she also loves collecting and reading books. So we'll look forward to their conversation shortly, but first, please help me welcome Raymond Antrobus. Hi, Raymond.
Hello. An honor to be here, a privilege to be here. I've always wanted to be in Seattle. I've never been to Seattle as well, specifically. So, you know, this is my first, I suppose, presence in the air of Seattle. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but oh well. I'm gonna read some poems from this book called All the Names Given, and I'm very much, I suppose, a British poet, and my surname Antrobus, people often assume is from everywhere else in the world apart from England. But it's a name which is Norse, Old Norse, which means it is a name that is so anciently English, it's become foreign to the English. So anytime I leave the country and I come back in the UK border, I always, without fail, get asked about my name and where it's from. And then when I say it's English, there's always follow-up questions to that. So not only is it an English name, it's actually the name of an English village up north in England, called in Cheshire, Antrobus village. And the name Antrobus translates in Old Norse as between the trees, or between the shrubs, between the bushes. So as a poet, that's such an interesting idea, right? Like, you're named after this centuries old village. So it gives you, in a way, a literal land to go to, and to be able to say this is a kind of heritage site, in a way, for anyone with the name. So my grandma had always told me about this village, and I'd never gone there while she was alive. And me and my mom went there before the pandemic had happened. And so that's where the book, All the Names Given, one of the places where it begins a kind of investigation into this name. So this poem is written right after I spent the day visiting Antrobus village. I should also say I am the grandson of preachers, and that comes into it as well. I'll talk a bit more about that. Antrobus, or Land of Angels. Wherever you are, you touch the bark of trees, different yet familiar, says Lord Milosh. I can be fiendish, I can't be English, say ghosts, some with shaved heads, some with cane roads, muttering themselves into notebooks. The barman's eyes and the Antrobus arms become sharp gates when I claim to be English. My mother born here, my grandfather a local preacher. Oh, well then, welcome, he says, or land your angels. There are enigmas in my deafness. I stare at the crest of gold lines behind the bar. I scar the cross of Davidic's line behind the bar. Hear my ghosts say fiendish English. The barman calls the whole village and my name does the rounds. My mother drives us to Antrobus Hall. 2 German shepherds surround the car. I climb out, it's raining. The dogs jump, their paws scraping a new coat of earth on my chest. A farmer appears, asks if we're descended from Edmund Antrobus. Sir Edmund Antrobus, 3rd Baronet, slaver, beloved father, overseer, owner of plantations in Jamaica, British Guyana, and St. Kitts. I shake my head, avoid the farmer's eye. My mother and I tread the cemetery of St. Mark's Antrobus and see everyone buried here is of Antrobus. We look up and see hawks in the ash trees and sparrows in the wheat fields and the rain-soaked stones of Antrobus. And after we walk the slick mirrors of wet roads, the curves of Barber's Lane, between trees, I take a photo of our shadows flung over the red berry bushes like black coats. The poem that follows on from this is called Language Signs. As I said, my grandfather is a preacher, and one of the things I have is a box of his sermons that he would go around to different churches around England mainly, delivering sermons. And I dip into the sermons every now and then. And this is the only poem I've managed to write so far, which incorporates some of the language from my granddad's sermons. Language signs. How shall it be known what is spoken? The yea shall speak in the air. 1 Corinthians 14:8-9. J.K. Antrobus, grandfather, I dreamt you returning your reading glasses to your eyes, opening your Bible, pointing at the words you couldn't say. You pointed at mercy and failure, and then you pointed at your white hair and your lips, and then at the ceiling of your church as if it were the roof of your own mouth. And I understood as much of the stone plaques on the walls or the pews which were wood, a word which once meant tree. All the men that raised me are dead, those bastards. I'm one self-pitying prick of a son. How do I bring back men who couldn't speak, men lost in drinks, men lost in books, drinks, graves? Where do I turn, knowing they left for hot taps running? I want to say, sorry, come to me, cut the hedges on your face so I can read your lips. The last poem I'm going to share from the book, All the Names Given, was written while I was living in New Orleans with my wife, who's from New Orleans. And just going to share with you this. Okay, just going to share with you this picture. Hopefully you can see this. This is a painting called Plantation Burial. And I'd like you to imagine that you have this name, Antrobus, and you are living in a new land, in a new place, completely uprooted and disconnected, seemingly, from your country. And you've got married, and you've walked into an art gallery on a whim, completely coincidentally, and you walked into a room and you've seen this painting on the wall, and it's a huge canvas. It's the biggest canvas in this room that you've just walked into. And you're looking at this painting and you're noting the people that are there. You're aware of the history of, plantations, particularly in Louisiana and across New Orleans. And then you see the person who painted this painting shares your name, John Antrobus. And then you think, oh, you're a poet, so you want to write something about this, and you might want to lean on other poets, another poet who's a painter, and perhaps shares some heritage. So what I did was I looked at the work of Lorna Goodison, the former poet laureate of Jamaica, who is also a painter and writes poems about her paintings and other paintings that have inspired her. And she's got a particular poem called How to Make Various Sorts of Black, about how black paint has been made and the ingredients that goes into black paint. Tabitha, I'm there in the gallery with her, and she's an art conservator, so she's able to look at different colors in a painting, on a canvas, and she's able to tell what shades or what part of a painting will need extra care, extra work. And what Tabitha was explaining to me, she was looking at the skin of these people in this painting, and she was saying, oh, that's like that kind of paint that is used to depict their skin is a very weak kind of paint and will be the first thing to deteriorate, and will require the most amount of work for her as an art conservator if she was conserving this painting. And so that just kind of erupted an idea which led to this poem. Plantation Paint. After Lorna Goodison and Plantation Burial in the historic New Orleans collection, 1860, Oil on Canvas by John Antrobus. Tabitha, the art conservator, squints at the color, tells me the paint depicting the black of these men huddled for a burial decay before the cypress trees surrounding them will decay. There are several kinds of black, she says, and the cypress trees surrounding them is all I see as we stand alive in this otherwise empty gallery. Why am I like this? What am I like? Who does it matter to? All details question my way of seeing. I worry what kind of black would mark me. I am not the paint made from vine twigs or burnt shells. I am not the lamp full of oil. Tabitha, tell me how you paint me. Tell me if I'm closer to the white painter with my name than I am to the black preacher, his hands wide to the sky, the mahogany rock of heaven. Sorry, I want to say, but you know by now, but I can't mention trees without every shade of my family appearing and disappearing. Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much. And it would be great now if Tiflo would join us. And there we go. And I'll just add a spotlight there. And we're just switching interpreters here. Wonderful. We'll give Brooke a minute to get set up. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that poetry, Raymond. It's powerful. And now I'm going to leave the two of you to chat more.
Yes, hello. Hey, Raymond. Thank you for sharing your poetry with all of us. Very powerful and moving. So I have so many questions for you now. I wanted to add a follow-up question for you as well, if you're ready. So I was wondering what inspired you. It sounds like your name really inspired you to create a lot of your poems. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that.
Yes, what inspired me, where to begin, it's almost kind of overwhelming to me to think of inspiration. I guess if I begin with what I thought the initial kind of seed for the book was, because the book I thought I was writing ended up being a very different book. But I was in a workshop in 2017 with the poet Chris Abani, who himself has English and African heritage. I mean, Nigerian specifically for him. And he asked me in this workshop if I had ever really if I felt I'd paid enough attention to the land of England, to the English mythologies, to the ancient and rich history, in fact, that England has as a place. You know, is it something I've really investigated for myself? And I thought, well, not really, because I published a book called The Perseverance, which is so much about my dad, and I wrote that book in Jamaica. My dad passed away, and I went back to Jamaica and wrote that. And so much of that book, The Perseverance, kind of is from the land of Jamaica And so this book is very much from the land, or rooted in the land of England, which is the heritage of my mother's land in a way. The first book, my father's land, this is my mother's land. And you know, it's an old one in literature, such an old question. You know, Shakespeare asks, "What's in the name?" And it's an invitation, I think, a very universal invitation. I think that question, "What's in a name?" for anyone with a name to investigate or examine and see what is erupted for them in their name. I think it's a rich territory for anyone. But for me, I was saw that, you know, like my name, Antrobus, my surname is a locational name. You know, it's a very specific place, a specific thing. And interestingly, when you have a locational name, it means anyone with that name can be linked back to that one specific place. And there's a real privilege in that, actually, being able to say, all right, okay, this is this, you know, this particular village or land or country is where this name that I happen to be born with begins. You know, as any kind of creative person, I think, can have a field day investigating that.
Oh, that's a great answer. And I just was planning to ask you another question, somewhat connected. And you've said, you know, this is really personal to you. So I was just wondering about your writing process, and how you were writing the book. And do you feel like when you're, when do you tend to write? When do you tend to write when you're feeling sad or conflicted? And so I guess I'm wondering about your writing process and how your emotions play into that, and how just being connected and how everything connects back to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's also a rich question. So I've been writing, you know, poems, stories, like journaling, you know, since I was a kid. And, you know, I went to at school, I was told by teachers that I couldn't write well. I couldn't write coherently. Some of my letters were the wrong way around and all of this kind of stuff. So I have quite, I'd say, an emotional history with writing, because I did it. It's something I've always done, as far as I can remember, instinctively. And yet in an educational setting, I was suddenly pathologized as someone who was almost, you know, semi-illiterate. It's very kind of a weird time, you know, when I was that young and at school. And I think my deafness played into that. I think my race played into that. I think my class played into that, and how you know, it was assumed what I was capable of. So I really, you know, writing has been one of the most main consistencies for me throughout my life. And it's kind of now blossomed into, you know, this craft of writing poetry, which I would say is different from the more kind of personal journaling or storytelling or cathartic kind of experience I had, you know, because I was very private with everything I wrote from when I was a kid up to when I was, you know, in my early 20s. And so I feel very rooted still in that, I suppose, spiritual and emotional relationship with writing. But when I'm writing a poem that I want to be, published or want people to read, I have to think about the reader. I have to think about how I want someone to receive the work and the different kinds of conversations I would like the poem or even the book to enter. So with this book in particular, it was a very emotional book to write because so much of it is about my mother and her history. And part of the process was actually showing my mother the poems I'd written about her and watching in real time her response to them and the kind of conversations that they prompted. And one of the reasons I wanted to write this book about my mother as well was I wanted to write it while she was alive. So I wrote about my dad after he died, and I felt like I would have loved to have actually shown him the poems that I'd written about him and had perhaps a very rich kind of, conversation with my dad about stuff I'd written about him. So I didn't get that time or an opportunity to do that with my dad, but I got to do that with my mom in this book. And yeah, it's difficult when you're writing about real people, when you're writing about someone else's life, like your parents aren't just your parents, they're people with their own individual identities and histories. And you're as the child, you're still an outsider to that, still observing that. And so I hope that All the Names Given is a kind of emotional account in some ways about what it's been like to be the son of my mother, and not necessarily a completely factual one. There are a few things in the book which my mum read and said, "Oh, I'm not sure about that," and an aunt of mine read and said, "I don't think your grandmother ever did this," and there were people which kind of started asking, about what was true and what wasn't. And I said, well, this was the kind of emotional truth for me. So yeah, it did ruffle some feathers with the family as well. And all of that has been part of the process of writing, not just a book of poetry, but a personal book about a personal history.
Now, in some ways, the book was, I guess you would say, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, your validation of your experiences growing up and what you observed and what you took from it. And all that, and that's all written down in a book, and that is so powerful. And I read some of your poetry, and I was able to bond with that. It was very emotional, and I was able to feel it. And I think that you made it clear in your book. And that leads me to my thoughts of a question. Funny thing is when I was reading your poetry, I came up with a list of questions, and I was going to propose those questions to you. But now that we're interacting, I'm looking at my questions now, and I feel like some of those questions you've already covered. So you pretty much covered them all. And when I was reading your book, I kept noticing your name appear. And I kept seeing Tabitha appear. And I wasn't quite sure if Tabitha was your mother or if that was an alternate person. And so I'm proposing that question to you on Tabitha.
Yeah, so the first time Tabitha appears in the book is in the poem Text and Image. Oh, sorry, should not wait. Oh, should I wait for? So okay. Okay. Yeah, so the first time Tabitha appears in the poem is in Text and Image, in which it begins.
Yeah.
Tabitha,
that's where I saw it.
yeah, so Tabitha texts me, "Why haven't you told me you love me?" I respond to that text message. I'm literally writing, "You love poems." And then about halfway down, it says, "We aren't doing things the old way. Our marriage is new age. No more you completely crap. Have your own life and I have my life." So Tabitha is my wife. And so in that, I'm talking about our marriage, and I'm talking about during the pandemic, we were separated for 9 months because she was in the States, I was in the UK. We weren't allowed to see each other. And so for 9 months, our relationship was purely virtual. And then Tabitha appears in Every Black Man, where she tells me, when I'm telling Tabitha this story about my grandmother and my father, and we're sitting by the Mississippi. So there are all these kind of, the book isn't meant to be read as a collection of poems. The book is like first poem to last poem, a kind of immersive journey with information about the people in the poems, like kind of building. So from the first poem, hopefully, I hope that it was clear that Tabitha is my wife from that first point where she appears. And then she appears as the art conservator in Plantation Paint. And then she appears in the poem, another poem where I'm talking about my family, and then there's a little bit of Tabitha's family history there, when she says, "When Tabitha said our cousin stabbed his father, I laughed and she closed up, turned away, sour." So yeah, I mean, basically Tabitha's my wife, and through her in the book, I got to think about marriage. So my parents weren't married, and I was trying to make sense of the fact that I was getting married without any real model for what marriage is. But it's not just about that. Like, I'm a British citizen, British person with Jamaican heritage, getting married to a Black American woman from the South. So within those two, the histories of those two nations and sites, like even the small history of somewhere like New Orleans, and then the Mississippi River, and then thinking about a place as specific as Antrobus in Cheshire, this village. There was a part, like I started writing poems about rivers. I wrote poems about the Mississippi River and the Thames, but that didn't, I wrote a lot of stuff actually, which just didn't end up in the book. So like I say, that's not, Tabitha is not just, my wife, she's also a a way in to talk about, I suppose, even the connection between a Black British world and a Black American world. Because in the UK, there's a tendency for the UK to distance itself from America. Often when you see UK news, so even during the George Floyd uprisings, there was this constant presence in all kinds of media, in liberal media, in left, right-wing media, everywhere, which was this really defensive response to George Floyd, which was, that's in America, that doesn't happen in England. Our police aren't armed. We're not killing Black people like America are. But actually, the question, or that kind of polemical idea, is the wrong way to frame it, in my opinion. The question should be, how are we like America? Instead of how are we not like America? Because we are like America in a lot of ways, and the UK is aspiring more and more to American systems, American prison systems, American healthcare systems. And America exists because of a civil war with the English. It's a really loaded, complicated. That we share a language, but there's American English and standard English, and then the sign language is different. The French sign language seems to be built more from American Sign Language seems to be built more from French Sign Language. British Sign Language is just kind of its own thing, but it's still very regional. So, for example, the kind of sign you would sign in London is different to the sign that you would sign in Glasgow, in Scotland. So it's, I don't want to simplify any of this. It's rich and it's complicated. But I've gone off on a tangent. Sorry, you asked who Tabitha was, and she's my wife. She's an art conservator. She's a Black woman from New Orleans.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate you mentioning your wife, and you expounded on that, and that helped me to understand the read. And what I read, well, one of your poems actually. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, you know what? I give up on that idea. Okay, so now when I was reading one of your poems, and on the poem, this is Tyrone Givens. Now, I was reading that, and I was wondering, obviously, you as a deaf individual, in a prison and experiencing barriers. Can you expound more on that person? And you did, and it made me wonder. I mean, I know obviously America and the British culture, they're their own places, but some of them have the same effect and the same experiences. Do you mind expounding on Tyrone Givens? And then, is it considered autism, like an oppression to deafness? It's not just autism, but there's other things on that. Do you mind expounding a little more on that?
Yeah. Tyrone was a friend of mine from school. He's a school friend. We were both in the same school together in London. Tyrone was probably the most popular kid in that year group. He was really good at football. He was a really good dancer. He was funny. He had these bright blue hearing aids. He was popular, and this was quite rare, but he was popular with the hearing kids and the deaf kids. The school that I went to was a deaf school, but then it was attached to a hearing school. So me and Tyrone would have some lessons in the deaf school.
Just to get some clarity, you said a deaf school?
What was that? Sorry.
You were saying a deaf school.
Yeah.
And it was next to or near a hearing school?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're like part of.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. So they were kind of close and linked. What else should I say about Tyrone? So he, I hadn't seen Tyrone since we leaving school, and a few years ago, a friend of mine, also from school, reached out to tell me that Tyrone had committed suicide, and it was such a shock. Because again, like I said, like he was this kid who, you know, if anyone's gonna have a fulfilling, vibrant life, you would assume it would be someone like him. But actually, he left school and really struggled, and ended up in a situation where he was beginning a prison sentence, and that's, you know, that's a whole other story for another time. But when he was put into prison, he'd had his hearing aids taken away from him, and then, you know, tried to get them back, tried to get some new one, tried to get some fixed, but they were just never returned. And the prison that he was in, he was the only deaf person in his ward. None of the wardens, none of the prisoners, no one knew BSL, any sign language. No one was deaf aware. There was no training that had gone in. There was no care for him. And this is actually a bit quite more common than people realize about deaf people who end up in prison, and suffer even more intense depression, you know, and senses of, and isolation. I didn't think I was going to write this poem. I didn't think I was able to write about Tyrone and what happened to him until, because I actually wrote this as a commission, until I was asked to write about one of the Universal Declarations of Human Rights. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, number 5, states, "No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." And I immediately thought of Tyrone and his story and what happened to him, and how it's not just a failure of, you know, of that prison, it's a failure of our society. I would say that this kind of violence, this kind of story is, you know, by definition, a human rights violation. So having understood that, I realized I could write about Tyrone in this way, you know, as a friend of mine, but also as a deaf person who experienced a complicated, but also not complicated, also quite straightforward injustice.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That information is very helpful understanding. And so my next question to you is, when I was reading the poem, I like the part where Christine um, uh,
Christie's son Kim.
Christy Sumkin, thank you. You know, obviously we're both aware of your work, but so in your book, I was really fascinated by this important thing that you included. And do you mind if you could just expound on her part in that book?
Yeah, sure. So Christine Sun Kim is for those that don't know, a deaf sound artist. And I'd been aware of her work for quite a while. She had an exhibition in London in 2015, which blew my mind. And there was part of an installation which is called Closer Captions, in which she had TV screens in each corner of the room, and on every screen was playing the same scene from a film, but the captions for the scene was different on each of the screens. And the idea being she had invited other deaf people, deaf friends, deaf peers to write their own captions to famous scenes. And it just blew my mind. I loved this concept of unsettling the assumption of what sound is and how sound can be articulated. Completely pulled the carpet out from under that any idea or any stable idea of sound. And as a deaf person, you know, I often rely on caption content. And however, I don't watch much TV. But during the pandemic, I found myself watching loads of TV captions, and I started to feel guilty about how much time I was spending watching TV. And I thought, well, what if I can create some kind of, you know, meaningful engagement with the captions content? And I thought of it, that Christine Sun Kim installation from all that time ago, from 2015, and was like, let me create captions. Let me take up this invitation to try and articulate sound for myself. Now that she has given us this idea that it's a subjective experience and not an objective one, the sound. So the book, All the Names Given, has captions throughout it, and the captions serve as a transition between some of the poems, but also between some of the ideas. And the most kind of concrete way I can talk about it as an experience is, so when I go to the cinema, I try to watch the captions screenings, and the kind of deafness I have, there are certain sounds that I don't hear at all. I don't hear any high-pitched sounds. So occasionally I'll be watching a film and the caption would be cattle boiling, birds singing, doorbell ringing, and I don't hear those sounds at all. So I just see the caption, and I'm invited to imagine what that sound is. And I found that if you write down a caption and you put it on a page, you democratize that experience for a reader, because anyone reading it has to then imagine it. It becomes a conceptual thing. Sound becomes conceptual. That to me is kind of revelatory and a great way, I think, to begin undoing, as Christine Sun Kim does in her work, undoing the assumptions of what sound is. So she's been a pillar for me in that.
Oh, thank you for expanding on that. And with her great work, Christy's important work. And so my last question to you now is, let me gather my thoughts here. Is there anything that you do differently with either this book today, or is there something that you feel that you should include that is something internal for you that you wanted to share that maybe is in the book, maybe there's something that's not in the book, but yeah, is there anything like that that you wanted to leave us with today?
So I would say that this book, or every book I write, in fact, everything I do has different versions. So I have a written version, a book version. I have an audio version. So I also work with sound artists and people who, create audio versions of the poems, which aren't just about, again, transcription, but they're about creating new versions or different versions. So the audio version of this book is a little bit different to the written version. And then when you see me perform, I work with friends of mine who are interpreters and deaf performers, and they have their own version of the book, which they perform. So recently I did a reading with a friend of mine who's a coder, and she's also a dancer. So she incorporated some of her dancing to some of her knowledge of BSL, and moved around the stage while I stood in the center of the stage reading the poems. And one of the pillars or anchors for her in the live kind of BSL version was, it was light and the hand shape of the light. And what was it? Light and there's another one. Light and trees. Yeah, so trees. And the way that trees came into the kind of transitioning between the tree and the light. And so even in that version, there was a kind of, different dimension of poetry happening. So what I would like to share with the generosity of your open question is, what if you're reading the book, this isn't like the final version. This is still something that exists on a continuum, and there are other ways to express other languages, other tones that are kind of still working themselves out in the journey, still work, like when I perform the poems, they're a little bit different every time. So it's like a living document. It's not something that's just dead on the page like a tombstone. my idea or my hope is that the book as an object is a living object. It's something we can engage with, and I hope that, you know, having like captions just on its own on a page is a way.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, is a way to live, is a way to keep this book kind of, you know, living, in being engaged with in the world. Even this idea that this is a UK version of the book, but it's the shape of a little screen even.
Oh yeah, thank you for that perspective. And I really appreciate that. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing from your book.
Thank you both so much. And Raymond, I really love the idea that you made concrete this idea that each reader interacts with your work in a new way and creates the poem new each time they read it, right? And I love that you're finding ways to make that tangible through the audio versions or the performance versions. I'm so grateful to both of you for this wonderful conversation, and Raymond's been holding up the UK version, so I'm going to hold up the American version just so people know what to look for in the bookstore or at the library. It's beautiful, right? I just wanted to remind folks that Elliott Bay Books have copies of Raymond's books, and the store's open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, or delivery. And you can find his books at their website, elliottbaybook.com. You can, of course, find his books at the library as well, spl.org. And we'll put links to those books in the chat as well. I'll also be posting a link to a survey in the chat, and I would really appreciate it if you took a minute after the program to copy and paste that into your browser and let us know what you think. We're so grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thank you to our program partners, Seattle Arts and Lectures and Elliott Bay Book Company, and a very special congratulations to Deaf Spotlight, who are celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. They do amazing work in our community, celebrating deaf artists and their work, and so we're so thrilled that they are celebrating their 10th anniversary. And you can learn more about Deaf Spotlight's work and the work of our other wonderful partners at links in the chat. We'll put that all in the chat. I also just wanted to take a minute and thank our wonderful interpreters who facilitated tonight's program. Ingrid, Brooke, Joshua, and David, we're so grateful for your help today. And as always, thanks to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And of course, thanks to you for joining us tonight. We are going to have Raymond close us out with one more poem, and then we'll send you all on your way. So thank you so much, Terica. Thank you so much, Raymond. And we'll enjoy the poetry and then say goodnight.
Thank you. So this poem is called For Tyrone Givens. One more thing I'll say about it is I wonder what your pandemic reads were. So for me, I had realized that I had for years pretended that I had read every novel by James Baldwin. And the truth is, this was a lie. I had not read every Baldwin novel. During the pandemic, I managed to read every Baldwin novel, and every Baldwin novel had a suicide in it. And I came to think about that. And that's one of the reasons why James Baldwin shows up in this poem. He also actually ended up in jail at one point, and he writes about that too. So this poem is for Tyrone Givens. Thank you again for listening. The paper said, putting him in jail without his hearing aids was like putting him in a hole in the ground. There are no hymns for deaf boys, or who can tell we're deaf without speaking to us? Tyrone's name was misspelled in the HMP Pentonville prison system. Once I was handcuffed, shoved into a police van. I didn't hear the officer say why. I was saved or my friend's mother who threw herself in the road and refused to let the van drive away? Who could have saved Tyrone? James Baldwin attempted suicide after each of his loves overdosed or jumped from bridges. He killed his characters, made them kill themselves. Rufus, Richard, black men who couldn't live like this. Tyrone, I won writing awards, bought new hearing aids and heard your name through the walls, heard my name through the walls. I bought a signed Baldwin book. The man who sold it to me didn't know you, me, or Baldwin. I feel I rescued it. I feel failed. Tyrone, the last time I saw you alive, I dropped my pen on the staircase. Didn't hear it fall, but you saw and ran down to get it. Handed it to me before disappearing, said, you might need this.